Hey guys, tonight we dive into the brutal reality of chasing wealth during the Viking Age, a time when gold meant blood, glory meant suffering, and the pursuit of riches often led to nothing but misery and death. From the bone-chilling fjords of Norway to the blood-soaked shores of England, this story is raw, unforgiving, and deeply human, a defining moment in medieval history that shatters every romantic notion you've ever had about Viking wealth and power. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what you think about our modern obsession with wealth versus the Viking experience. Now, let's begin. You wake up in the year 847 AD, and the first thing you notice is the cold. Not just any cold, but the kind that seeps through every layer of wool and leather, settling deep in your bones like an unwelcome guest that refuses to leave. The smell hits you next with smoke mixed with unwashed bodies, rotting fish, and the ever-present dampness that clings to everything in this Norse settlement. You're lying on a straw mattress that's seen better decades, and as you shift, the rough fibers poke through the thin cloth, reminding you that comfort is a luxury you've never known. Outside your small wooden dwelling, you can hear the sounds of a community slowly stirring to life, the scrape of iron tools against stone, the low murmur of voices discussing the day's survival tasks, and somewhere in the distance, the rhythmic hammering of a blacksmith already at work. But beneath these familiar sounds, there's something else, a tension, an undercurrent of desperation that seems to flow through the settlement like a cold stream. You see, in this world, wealth isn't just desirable, it's the difference between life and death, between respect and ridicule, between having a voice in your community and being nothing more than another mouth to feed. The pursuit of riches drives men to cross treacherous seas, to swing axes at strangers' necks, to leave behind everything they've ever known in search of silver and gold that might, just might, lift them out of the grinding poverty that defines their existence. As you slowly rise from your bed, your joints protesting from the cold and the hard sleeping surface, you notice the way the morning light filters through the small window opening. It's a gray, filtered light that seems to drain the color from everything it touches. The walls of your home are simple timber, chinked with mud and moss to keep out the worst of the wind. But the cold still finds its way in through countless small gaps. Your stomach growls, a sharp reminder that hunger is your constant companion. The previous night's meal of thin gruel and whatever scraps of dried fish you could afford sits uneasily in your belly, more at ease than true nourishment. You know that today, like every day, will be spent trying to scrape together enough food to survive until tomorrow. But today feels different somehow. Today, there's talk in the settlement of ships being prepared, of wealthy monasteries across the sea filled with silver crosses and golden chalices, of lands where the soil is rich and the people are soft from easy living. The men speak of these places with a hunger that goes beyond mere appetite. It's the desperate hunger of those who have nothing left to lose. You've heard the stories, of course, tales of warriors who sailed west and returned with chests full of treasure, their arms heavy with silver arm rings, their necks adorned with gold torques that caught the light like captured sunbeams. These men walk differently now, their backs straighter, their voices carrying the weight of authority that only wealth can provide. They eat meat regularly, their children wear clothes without patches, and their wives don't have the hollow-cheeked look of chronic hunger that marks so many women in your village. The allure is intoxicating. As you step outside into the crisp morning air, you can almost taste the possibility of change, of escape from this grinding cycle of scarcity and struggle. The idea of returning home laden with treasure, of never again watching your family go hungry, of earning the respect and fear that comes with wealth, it burns in your chest like a flame that threatens to consume everything else. But perhaps, as you stand there in the growing light of dawn, watching the mist rise from the fjord like the ghosts of all those who've tried and failed before you, you might notice something else. Maybe it's in the way the successful raiders sometimes stare off into the distance, their eyes holding shadows that no amount of gold seems able to chase away. Or perhaps it's in the way they clutch their weapons even in peaceful moments, as if expecting attack at any second. Maybe you catch a glimpse of how they flinch at unexpected sounds, or how they sometimes wake screaming in the night. The pursuit of wealth in the Viking Age isn't just about crossing dangerous seas or fighting fierce battles, though those dangers are real and terrible enough. It's about what happens to your soul when you discover that every piece of silver comes with its own weight of suffering. Every golden armband carries the memory of the person who died wearing it, and every successful raid plants the seeds of future revenge that may one day bloom into your own destruction. As the settlement fully awakens around you and the sounds of preparation begin to fill the air, the sharpening of weapons, the mending of sails, the hushed conversations about routes and targets, you find yourself standing at a crossroads that countless Vikings have faced before you. The promise of wealth beckons like a siren's call, beautiful and terrible in equal measure, offering everything you've ever wanted while demanding a price that might be higher than you can imagine. And so, as another day begins in this harsh northern world, you must decide whether the glitter of gold is worth the rivers of blood that always seem to follow in its wake. The truth about Viking life begins long before you ever set foot on a longship or swing an axe in anger. It begins in the moment you draw your first breath in a world that seems designed to test whether you deserve to take a second one. You are born into scarcity not as an accident of fate, but as the fundamental condition of existence in 9th century Scandinavia, where survival is a daily negotiation with forces far beyond your control. Picture yourself as a child in this harsh landscape, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, waking up on a morning when the frost has painted intricate patterns on the inside walls of your family's single-room dwelling. Your breath comes out in small puffs of vapor, and you instinctively curl deeper into the pile of furs and rough wool blankets that you share with your siblings. The cold is so intense that it seems to have a personality of its own, malicious, persistent, always searching for new ways to creep into your bones. Your father is already gone, having left before dawn to check the fishing nets or tend to the few scraggly sheep that represent your family's entire wealth. Your mother moves quietly in the dim light, her movements efficient and practiced as she tends to the fire that must never be allowed to die completely. You watch her face in the flickering light and notice how the lines around her eyes seem to have deepened overnight, how her hands shake slightly from cold and constant worry. The smell of your home is something you'll carry with you forever, a mixture of wood smoke, unwashed bodies, damp wool, and the underlying mustiness of a structure that's never truly dry. The floor is packed earth covered with thin layers of rushes that are changed when they can be gathered, which isn't nearly often enough. Every surface feels slightly damp to the touch, and you've learned to sleep curled in specific positions to avoid the spots where water drips through the roof during storms. Your stomach contracts with hunger, a sensation so familiar that you barely register it anymore. Breakfast, if it comes at all, will be thin porridge made from whatever grain your family managed to store from the previous harvest, assuming the harvest was good enough to leave anything after paying the jarl his tribute. More likely, you'll gnaw on a piece of dried fish or a heel of bread so hard that your jaw aches from the effort of chewing it. But perhaps the most profound aspect of your childhood scarcity isn't the physical discomfort, it's the way scarcity shapes your understanding of the world itself. You learn that everything has value, that nothing can be wasted, that today's comfort might mean tomorrow's starvation. You watch your parents make impossible calculations every day, whether to burn more wood to keep warm or save it for the coldest part of winter, whether to eat the seed grain now or risk starving while waiting for the next planting season, whether to trade your only good knife for food or keep it and hope you can hunt successfully. The social hierarchy of scarcity reveals itself in countless small ways throughout your childhood. You notice how the jarls' children have rounder faces and warmer clothes, how they laugh more easily and seem to move through the world without the constant tension that marks your own family. You see how your father's posture changes when he speaks to men of higher status, how his shoulders curve inward, how his voice becomes quieter and more deferential, how he seems to shrink physically in their presence. The concept of wealth, in this context, becomes almost mythical. You hear stories of lands far to the south where people eat white bread every day, where the houses are built of stone and stay warm even in winter, where clothes are made of fabric so fine it feels like water running through your fingers. These tales seem as fantastical as stories of dragons or giants, interesting to imagine, but bearing no relation to the world you actually inhabit. Your education in scarcity continues through the changing seasons, each one bringing its own particular challenges and deprivations. Spring means the desperate time when last year's stored food is running out, but new crops aren't yet ready to harvest. You learn to identify which plants and roots are edible, how to find birds' eggs, how to catch fish with your bare hands when necessary. Summer brings relief, but also the crushing pressure of knowing that every berry not picked, every fish not caught, every bit of food not preserved might mean death in the coming winter. Autumn is a time of frantic preparation when every daylight hour must be spent gathering, hunting, and preserving food for the long dark months ahead. You watch your mother work until her hands bleed, smoking fish, drying meat, gathering herbs and nuts, always calculating whether they have enough to last until spring. The arithmetic of survival becomes second nature. So many pounds of dried fish per person per month, so many bundles of firewood needed to keep the fire burning, so many warm garments required to prevent frostbite. And then comes winter, the great test that separates the prepared from the doomed. The darkness seems to swallow the world for months at a time, broken only by brief periods of gray twilight that barely deserve the name of day. The cold becomes a living thing, pressing against your dwelling like a massive predator seeking entry. You learn to move slowly to conserve body heat, to sleep pressed against other family members for warmth, to wake yourself regularly during the night to feed the fire that stands between your family. At Death Dot, it's during these winter months that the true meaning of scarcity reveals itself. You watch your baby sister grow thinner week by week, her cries becoming weaker as your mother's milk dries up from her own malnutrition. You see strong men reduce to shadows of themselves, their muscles wasting away as their bodies consume, themselves trying to stay alive. You witness the terrible calculations that families must make, whether to share their dwindling food supplies with elderly grandparents who might not survive anyway, whether to send older children to live with relatives who might have slightly more resources. Death becomes a familiar presence in your community during these months. Perhaps it's the old woman who lives alone and is found one morning frozen in her bed, or the young man who ventures out in a blizzard to check on livestock and never returns. The bodies are stored in snow until the ground thaws enough for burial, and you grow accustomed to the sight of wrapped forms stacked like cordwood behind the village hall. This is the world that shapes you, that forms your understanding of what life offers and what it demands in return. Every successful day, every morning you wake up still breathing, every meal that fills your belly even partially, every night you fall asleep without the sharp pain of extreme hunger, feels like a victory snatched from the jaws of defeat. You learn that comfort is temporary, that security is an illusion, and that the difference between having enough and having nothing can be measured in a single bad harvest, a harsh winter, or a moment of poor judgment. And so, when you hear the men of your village talking about sailing west to seek their fortunes, when you listen to tales of monasteries filled with gold and lands heavy with grain, the appeal isn't just about wanting more, it's about the desperate hope of escaping a system that seems designed to grind you down until nothing remains but bones and memories. The pursuit of wealth becomes not just an ambition, but a form of rebellion against a world that has shown you nothing but scarcity since the moment you drew your first breath. As you grow into adolescence in this environment, carrying the accumulated weight of years of hunger and cold and watching loved ones struggle and die, you begin to understand why so many young men look toward the sea with such desperate longing. The promise of wealth represents more than just material comfort. It represents the possibility of finally having enough, of never again watching a sibling waste away from hunger, of being the one who provides rather than the one who takes. The dream always begins the same way. You're standing on a beach somewhere far from home, your arms heavy with silver, your ship's hold packed with treasures beyond counting. The other warriors look at you with respect, perhaps even fear, and when you return to your village, children point at you in wonder while their parents nod with approval. Your family will never go hungry again. Your name will be remembered in songs. You will finally matter in a world that has treated you like dirt since the day you were born. But dreams, as you're beginning to learn, are cruel things that bear little resemblance to the brutal realities of turning those fantasies into flesh and blood truth. The path from dreaming about wealth to actually acquiring it through raiding is paved with suffering so profound that many who survive the journey wish they had never begun it at all. Your initiation into this world begins not with glory, but with pain. The man who will teach you to fight, a grizzled warrior named Bjorn, whose left arm hangs slightly crooked from an old wound, looks at you with the kind of cold assessment usually reserved for livestock being evaluated for slaughter. You're 15, maybe 16 years old, skinny from chronic malnutrition, and your hands are soft from a life spent mostly on domestic tasks rather than wielding weapons. You want to be a raider, Bjorn asks, and there's no warmth in his voice, no encouragement, just a flat statement that hangs in the cold air like a challenge. When you nod eagerly, he picks up a wooden practice sword and without warning, strikes you across the ribs with a force that drops you to your knees, gasping for air that won't come. That, he says, standing over you while you struggle to breathe, was nothing, a gentle tap. Wait until someone tries to actually kill you. The training that follows is designed to break you down completely, before building you into something that might survive a few minutes of real combat. Every morning before dawn, you're dragged from your bed and forced to run through the forest until your lungs feel like they're filled with fire. Your legs shake so badly you can barely stand. Then comes weapons practice, hours upon hours of swinging heavy swords until your arms scream in protest. Learning to use a shield that feels like it weighs as much as a boulder. Practicing spear thrusts until your shoulders burn with a pain so intense you sometimes vomit from the exertion. But the physical conditioning, brutal as it is, represents only the beginning of your transformation. What Bjorn is really teaching you is how to think like someone who kills for a living. He shows you how to look at another human being and see not a person with hopes, at fears and family who love them, but rather as an obstacle to be removed, or a source of potential wealth to be harvested. Look at me, he commands during one particularly intense training session, his scarred face inches from yours. What do you see? I see Bjorn, you stammer, confused by the question. The blow comes so fast you don't see it coming, knocking you backwards into the mud. Wrong, he growls. You see a target. You see weak points, the gap under my arm where the chainmail doesn't quite overlap, the spot on my neck where a quick blade thrust would open my throat, the way I favor my left leg because of an old wound. You see these things first, always. First, before you see anything else, because in a fight, the man who sees the person instead of the target is the man who dies. Week by week, month by month, this training begins to change something fundamental inside you. The part of your mind that used to automatically see other people as fellow human beings starts to quiet, replaced by a cold analytical voice that catalogs vulnerabilities and calculates attack strategies. You learn to suppress empathy not through any conscious decision, but because empathy becomes a luxury you literally cannot afford if you want to survive what's coming. The psychological transformation is perhaps even more brutal than the physical one. You find yourself having dreams where you kill strangers with your bare hands. And the worst part isn't the violence of these dreams. It's how good they make you feel. How powerful. How finally in control of a world that has spent your entire life controlling you. You wake from these dreams with a mixture of shame and anticipation that makes your stomach turn. Your relationships with family and friends begin to change as well. Your younger siblings look at you differently now, with a mixture of awe and something that might be fear. Your mother watches you with worried eyes when she thinks you're not looking, perhaps sensing that the sun she raised is slowly being replaced by something harder and more dangerous. The gentle conversations you used to have around the fire in the evening become stilted and awkward, as if you're all speaking different languages now. The weapons themselves become extensions of your body through months of relentless practice. The sword that once felt impossibly heavy now balances perfectly in your grip. The spear that used to wobble uncertainly when you thrust it now flies straight and true toward whatever target you choose. The shield that seemed clumsy and unwieldy now moves with fluid precision, deflecting imaginary blows while you plan your counterattack. But perhaps the most disturbing change is how normal the violence begins to feel. Bjorn stages mock battles where you and the other trainees fight with real weapons, not sharp enough to kill, but certainly capable of inflicting serious injury. The first time you see blood drawn in these exercises, you feel sick and dizzy. By the 10th time, you barely notice. By the 20th, you're disappointed when your own strikes fail to break skin. The older warriors who sometimes visit to watch your training sessions tell stories of their own raids, and you find yourself hanging on every word with an intensity that borders on obsession. They describe pulling monasteries apart stone by stone, searching for hidden treasure, the weight of silver arm rings stacked up to their elbows, the satisfying crunch of an enemy's bones breaking under their weapons. These stories fuel your dreams and make the hard realities of training seem worthwhile. But occasionally, if you pay close attention, you might notice things the storytellers don't explicitly mention. The way their hands shake slightly when they describe certain battles, how their eyes go distant and empty when they talk about the sounds wounded enemies make when they're dying, the way they drink heavily after telling these tales, as if they're trying to wash away tastes that won't leave their mouths. As your training progresses and the day approaches, when you'll be deemed ready for your first raid, you begin to understand that you're not just learning to fight, You're learning to become someone else entirely. The scared, hungry boy who began this process is being systematically dismantled and replaced with a tool designed for a single purpose: taking wealth from others through violence. And the threat of violence, the final stage of your transformation, comes when Bjorn hands you your first real weapon, not a practice sword, but a genuine blade forged for killing. The weight of it in your hands feels different from anything you've held before, heavier somehow despite being perfectly balanced. This is a tool that has ended lives, that has opened throats and pierced hearts, and now it belongs to you. This sword doesn't care about your dreams, Bjorn tells you as you stand there holding your new weapon, feeling its potential like electricity running through your arms. It doesn't care about your family or your honor or your need to prove yourself. It only cares about one thing: whether you're willing to use it when the moment comes. Everything else is just noise. As you prepare to leave everything familiar behind and sail toward whatever wealth and glory await across the sea, you carry with you not just weapons and supplies, but the accumulated weight of months spent learning to see the world through the eyes of a predator. The farming village where you were born looks smaller now, more fragile, populated by people who seem soft and vulnerable in ways that you never noticed before your training began. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a quiet voice wonders whether the person you've become in pursuit of wealth is someone your former self would have recognized. But that voice grows quieter each day, drowned out by the sound of waves against the ship's hull and the promise of silver gleaming in distant lands. Ships, storms, and starvation's longship that will carry you toward your dreams of wealth looks magnificent from the shore, its carved dragon head rising proudly from the prow, its shallow draft promising swift passage over both sea and river. But once you're actually aboard, cramped shoulder to shoulder with 30 other men in a space barely 60 feet long, the romance of Viking seafaring dies a quick and miserable death. Your first sensation as the ship pushes away from the familiar coastline is how small everything suddenly becomes. The vessel that seemed so impressive on land now feels like a fragile sliver of wood, balanced precariously on an ocean that stretches endlessly in every direction. The waves that look gentle from the beach reveal themselves to be massive swells that lift the entire ship and then drop it with bone-jarring impacts that make your teeth chatter and your spine compress with each landing dot you find your assigned position on the rowing bench, wedged between a man who reeks of fermented fish and another whose nervous breathing comes in sharp, rapid bursts. The oar in your hands is heavier than you expected, worn smooth by countless previous hands, and the rhythm of rowing that seems so simple when demonstrated on shore quickly becomes an exhausting ordeal that makes your shoulders burn and your palms blister within the first hour. But the physical discomfort of rowing pales in comparison to what happens to your body once the ship reaches open water and begins its relentless battle against the waves. Seasickness strikes you like a physical blow, starting as a queasy unsteadiness in your stomach and rapidly escalating into a full-body revolt that leaves you hanging over the side of the ship, retching until nothing comes up but bitter bile that burns your throat raw. The other men laugh at your misery, not from cruelty necessarily, but from the grim humor that develops among people sharing extreme discomfort. Everyone except the most experienced sailors suffers through the same ordeal, and the ship soon fills with the sounds and smells of men losing their battles with motion sickness. The deck becomes slick with vomit, and the stench mixes with the salt spray and unwashed bodies to create an atmosphere so foul that breathing becomes an act of conscious will. Sleep on a longship is less actual rest and more a series of brief, unconscious moments stolen between waves that threaten to wash you overboard. There are no berths, no hammocks, nothing but the hard wooden deck where you curl up using your shield as a pillow and your cloak as inadequate protection against the constant spray of seawater. The ship moves constantly, pitching, rolling, rising and falling in ways that make your inner ear scream in protest, and you quickly learn that real sleep is impossible. Instead, you drift in and out of a miserable half-consciousness punctuated by moments of stark terror when particularly large waves crash over the bow and fill the bottom of the ship with enough water to require immediate bailing. Everyone takes turns with the leather buckets, frantically scooping water and dumping it overboard while the ship groans and flexes alarmingly. With each fresh assault from the sea, the food situation reveals itself to be even worse than you imagined. During your romantic fantasies about raiding, the ship carries barrels of water that quickly develop a stagnant taste, dried fish that becomes increasingly leathery and salt-encrusted as the voyage progresses, and hard biscuits that are often crawling with weevils. Fresh food is impossible to preserve on long voyages, so you subsist on rations that would barely keep you alive on land, while simultaneously performing the exhausting physical labor of rowing and sailing in harsh conditions. Hunger becomes your constant companion, gnawing at your belly with an intensity that makes concentration difficult. The small portions of food distributed twice daily barely take the edge off your appetite, and you find yourself obsessing about meals you've eaten in the past, constructing elaborate fantasies about the feast you'll enjoy when the raid is successful. But these daydreams are interrupted by the harsh reality of another day, spent rowing against headwinds or bailing water while your stomach contracts with emptiness. Water rationing proves even more tortuous than food restrictions. The barrels that seem so large when loaded at the dock quickly reveal themselves to be inadequate for the number of men aboard and the length of the journey. Each man receives carefully measured portions twice daily, barely enough to replace what you lose through sweating and seasickness. Your lips crack from salt and dehydration, your tongue feels thick and swollen, and you develop a constant headache that pounds behind your eyes like a blacksmith's hammer. The weather, which seemed merely uncomfortable during your first days at sea, gradually reveals its true malevolence as the voyage continues. Storms arrive with terrifying suddenness, transforming the ocean from merely hostile to actively murderous. The waves grow to impossible heights, towering over the ship like moving mountains before crashing down with enough force to splinter wooden snap ropes. During these tempests, rowing becomes impossible and everyone simply hangs on while the ship is tossed about like a toy in the hands of an angry child. You learn what real fear means during your first major storm, when the ship climbs wave faces so steep that you're looking almost straight up at the sky, only to plunge down the other side into troughs so deep that walls of water rise on both sides like the sides of a liquid canyon. The ship flexes and creaks with each impact, and you begin to understand viscerally that the difference between reaching your destination and drowning in the middle of the ocean might come down to a few crucial pieces of wood holding together. For just a few more hours, death at sea reveals itself to be commonplace rather than exceptional. Men fall overboard during storms and disappear into the churning water. Before anyone can even attempt a rescue, others develop fevers or infections that, without proper medicine or care, quickly become fatal. The bodies of the dead are wrapped in sailcloth, weighted with stones, and consigned to the depths, with brief ceremonies that feel inadequate for the magnitude of loss, but are all that can be managed under the circumstances. You watch these sea burials with a growing understanding that your own chances of survival are far from certain. The ocean doesn't care about your dreams of wealth or your family's needs back home. It's an indifferent force that kills randomly and without mercy, and every day you remain alive on its surface is a gift that could be revoked at any moment. The psychological toll of the voyage begins to reveal itself as the weeks pass. Men who seem confident and jovial on shore become silent, withdrawn, staring out at the endless water with haunted expressions. Tempers fray under the constant stress, and fights break out over trivial matters: a perceived slight during food distribution, an accidentally kicked foot during the night, a disagreement about navigation. These conflicts are quickly suppressed by the ship's captain, who understands that discipline must be maintained at all costs. But the underlying tensions continue to simmer just beneath the surface. Sleep deprivation combines with malnutrition and constant stress to create a state of mind that wavers between grim determination and something approaching madness. You find yourself having conversations with family members who aren't there, or staring at the water for hours while your mind drifts into strange fantasies about what lies beneath the waves. The boundary between waking and sleeping becomes blurred, and sometimes you're not entirely sure whether the horrors you're experiencing are real or products of your increasingly unstable mental state. As land finally appears on the horizon after what feels like months at sea, though it's probably been only weeks, you realize that the journey itself has already extracted a price from you that no amount of treasure can fully repay. The confident young warrior who set sail from your homeland has been replaced by someone harder, more desperate, and far more willing to do whatever it takes to ensure that this ordeal hasn't been for nothing. The ship approaches the foreign shore, and you grip your weapons with hands that shake from exhaustion and anticipation. The real test is just beginning, but you've already learned that the pursuit of wealth demands sacrifices you never imagined. When you were dreaming of glory back in your village, the sea has taught you that survival itself is a form of victory, and that everything else, including the treasure you've come so far to claim, is merely a bonus. if you're strong enough and lucky enough to live long enough to enjoy it. The reality of glorious battle horn sounds, piercing the cold air like a jagged knife slicing through fog. Your heart hammers against your ribs as you grip your sword tighter, toes digging into the soft earth beneath your feet. Across the beach, the enemy's outpost stands silent, unsuspecting or perhaps terrified, just as you now feel. This is the moment for which you've trained, the moment where dreams of glory and wealth confront the brutal, unforgiving reality of battle. But perhaps before the clash begins, take a breath with me. Feel the dampness in the air, the chill prickling your skin beneath your leather armor. You might notice the tang of salt from the sea carried on a cold wind, mingling with the metallic scent of sharpened steel and sweaty bodies packed close. Together, the dull ache in your muscles from days of rowing and marching hums faintly. A low drum beneath the tension, the battlefield unfolds slowly before you, deceptively calm. A wide stretch of shoreline bordered by dense forest. The sand beneath your boots is cold and uneven, scattered with driftwood and stone slick with seaweed. In your ears, the distant cries of gulls mix with the whisper of the waves, almost mocking in their casual persistence, as if the sea itself is indifferent to the violets. About to erupt, the first charge is sudden and terrible. Your enemies. Warriors surge forward, a wall of flesh and steel, faces contorted in fear and rage. You feel the ground tremble beneath countless pounding feet. Your voice joins the cacophony of battle cries, harsh and raw sound you hadn't realized you could make and tell now. Time seems to slow as your sword meets a shield, the sharp clang echoing like thunder. The smell of sweat and blood and smoke fills the air, dense and choking. The fight is nothing like the heroic stories told around fires back home. It's chaos, noise, confusion, limits of sight muddied by flying dirt, thick with the pounding of bodies and the clash of weapons. Your arms burn from swinging the heavy sword. Your legs tremble beneath you as you dodge a spear's deadly thrust. Barely in time, you taste blood at first. You think it's your own, but as the battle rages, distinguishing between friend and foe becomes nearly impossible. You see a comrade beside you falter, a cruel axe biting deep into his shoulder. He stumbles, eyes wide with shock, and you want to scream at him to keep fighting. But his knees buckle, and he collapses onto the cold, hard ground. You watch helplessly as another warrior, a man you once shared bread with, slashes at an opponent, only to catch a hidden dagger in his side. He grunts, staggers, then falls face first into the dirt. The ground itself seems stained with their pain. The concept of glory feels distant, almost obscene here. There's no time to savor victories, no moments to bask in heroism. Every breath you take tastes metallic, thick with fear and exhaustion. The sun climbs higher, but the battle drags on without mercy, without pause. Around you, bodies fall, some convulsing, some painfully writhing, some still and silent forever. You might notice the sharp contrast between the warriors' hardened faces and the sudden, flickering expressions of shock when death finally claims them. Wounds are brutal and unforgiving. Without proper medical care, a simple cut can turn septic. A broken bone can become a permanent disability. You glimpse the battlefield medics, if they can be called, that tripping arrows from flesh, with little regard for pain, pressing crude cloths into gaping wounds. No soothing whispers, no anesthetics, just quick, merciless attempts to pass the dying so they might live long enough to fight another day. The cries of the wounded pierce the air, sharp and desperate. There's no room for pity here, only for survival. You hear the grinding, ragged breathing of a man whose leg has been shattered by a spear, the wet, choking cough of someone struggling to breathe after a blow to the chest. Nearby, a woman, yes, women sometimes fight alongside men, clutches a broken arm, her teeth gritted against pain, eyes fierce and unyielding dot as the battle wears on. Fatigue sets deeper into your limbs, your muscles scream for rest, your throat is raw from shouting, your skin slick with sweat and grime. The sky shifts imperceptibly as hours pass, the sun casting long, eerie shadows over the carnage. You can see it now, the cost of wealth. The price of glory lay strewn across the battlefield in bodies, broken dreams, and bloody promises. And yet, despite the horror, the fighting does not cease. The survivors regroup, weapons raised, eyes wild with desperation. You might notice how fear and fury twist into a strange camaraderie, binding warriors together in a shared reckoning with death. The will to continue, sometimes it feels not like courage, but a raw, animal instinct to cling to life by any means necessary. When the final horn sounds, signaling the end of the bloodletting, the battlefield falls unnervingly silent except for the groans of the wounded and the distant crash of the sea. the air is thick and heavy, as if the earth itself struggles to breathe beneath the weight of so much suffering. You stand among friends and foes alike, shaken, battered, your heart heavy with the knowledge that for every golden arm ring or stolen chalice, countless lives have been shattered beyond repair. And so, as you lower your sword and the sun begins its slow descent toward the horizon, take a moment to let that settle. The glory you saw feels pale against the grim reality of what it demanded: pain, fear, loss, and a burden on the soul far heavier than any treasure chest. The battle is over for now, but the echoes of its horrors will follow you long after. You return to shore, long after the coins are counted and the stories told. Because in the Viking Age, the pursuit of wealth through battle was never just about riches, it was about survival. And survival was often a story written in blood. Trading in terror and slavish as the dawn breaks over the cold, mist-shrouded shore, the aftermath of battle settles like a heavy fog over the raiders and the defeated alike. But the swords have fallen silent only to make way for another kind of commerce, one darker, more chilling, and wrought not with gold or silver coins, but with human lives. You find yourself in the heart of a bustling, grim market not far from the shore, a place where the spoils of war are unpacked, examined, sorted. The air here is thick with the smell of sweat, unwashed bodies, and an acrid tang of smoke from nearby fires used to prepare the day's meager meals. Around you, the low murmur of voices rises and falls, punctuated by the occasional sharp cry or desperate plea that cuts through the sea of sounds like a knife. Slavery is not an abstraction here. It is a brutal, unavoidable reality. People, once free, mothers, fathers, children, are now shackled and displayed like livestock. You see the rough iron chains biting into wrists and ankles, the torn clothes revealing bruised skin, the eyes wide with a mixture of terror, defiance, and weary resignation. The captives are herded into pens, their movements constrained and awkward. Some slump against one another, too exhausted to resist, while others stare silently ahead, their minds retreating into places where none can reach. Maybe you notice the trembling hands of a young woman clutching her child, offering what little comfort she can amidst the chaos, or the hollow cheeks of an old man who has forgotten what freedom feels like, but clings to memory like a fading light. The traders, men and women hardened by years of such exchanges, examine their human merchandise with callous indifference. They prod, poke, and judge potential buyers, discussing ages, health, and skills with the detached tone of merchants assessing cattle or horses, strong arms, good for farm work. One hisses Sotovis, eyeing a man who barely manages to lift his head. Young, can weave and spin. Another adds, nodding at a girl no older than 10. The value of a person is reduced to utility, nothing more, a cruel calculus of survival and profit. You watch as a deal is struck, a handful of silver exchanged for a trembling woman, her wrists brushed roughly and chained, her protests muffled and ignored. The buyer drags her away, already planning what she will become: property, tool, object. The sight unsettles you deeply, yet the market moves on, relentless and unyielding, as more captives are peddled like commodities under the gray sky. Slavery lies at the very core of the Viking pursuit of wealth. For many raiders, the profit from selling slaves back in their homelands proves far more lucrative and reliable than the uncertain plunder of gold and silver. Enslaved people are transported from one community to another, a constant flow of human suffering fueled by the ceaseless hunger for power and riches. The captives become currency, bargaining chips in a brutal game where empathy is a fatal weakness. Behind the scenes, darker realities unfold. Some captives face unimaginable horrors, chains to tight, punishments for the slightest infraction, forced labor under harsh overseers who see them not as humans, but as tools to be broken or discarded. You might feel the oppressive weight of this reality pressing in, the knowledge that every precious piece of stolen silver has a shadow woven from the tears and blood of these enslaved souls. The family you left behind, mothers, fathers, children, may now be among those shackled in distant markets. The realization that wealth found on foreign shores may come at the cost of loved ones. Freedom hangs heavily in the air, a silent question you dare not speak aloud, despite the terror and despair that permeate these marketplaces. Some captives resist in quiet and powerful ways. You might notice moments of defiance, a whispered prayer, a shared glance of solidarity, a stolen act of kindness, proof that even in chains, the human spirit can flicker and endure. As the sun sinks low, casting long shadows over the market, stalls and pens, You feel the growing weight of this truth. The pursuit of wealth in the Viking Age was tangled in a web of brutality and human suffering that is easy to overlook when told in tales of glory and conquest. And so, as the market begins to quiet and the captives settle into their grim new existence, take a moment to breathe with me. Let the sounds fade, the murmurs, the cries, the clinking of chains, and hold close the understanding that behind every treasure lies a story of terror, because in this brutal world, wealth was not measured only in silver and gold, but in the human lives forever altered or shattered by its relentless pursuit. The journey through this difficult truth is far from over, and as twilight deepens, you find yourself drawn toward the complex, often lonely existence of those who wielded that wealth, the jarls, the chieftains, the men burdened not only by riches, but by the heavy price they demanded, hoarding gold, losing soul as the flickering flames of the evening fire cast long, wavering shadows across the timber longhouse. You sit among the gathered warriors and chieftains, their faces weathered and hardened by years of battle and hardship. The spoils of recent raids lie heaped in the center, shimmering arm rings, gilded chalices, and sacks heavy with silver coins. To an outsider, this might seem the pinnacle of success, the reward for courage and tenacity. Yet here, beneath the gleam of treasure, something far darker simmers. You notice the weight of gold not just in the heavy sacks or glinting ornaments, but in the atmosphere around these men. Their laughter, when it comes, is brittle, edged with unease. Their eyes dart constantly to the shadows, hands drift toward weapons even in times of peace. The same gold that promises safety and respect also brings suspicion, fear, and isolation. The relentless need to guard this wealth tightens around them like a chain, binding their hearts and minds. Imagine yourself in their place, surrounded by riches but unable to fully enjoy them. The longhouses' walls offer shelter, but they also confine, enclosing a restless spirit that grows cage-like. The gleam of gold draws jealous gazes not only from rivals, but even from supposed friends and kin. Trust becomes a fragile thing, broken by whispered plots and hidden daggers. Perhaps you sense the constant paranoia that gnaws at these men. Each coin hoarded is a prized possession to protect, but also a beacon that marks you as a target. Raiders from neighboring clans, enemies nursing grudges, even your own kin might plot theft or assassination. The price of wealth is a ceaseless vigilance that never lets you rest. Sleep is often shallow and interrupted, shadows seeming to move in unexpected places, and every unexpected noise a potential threat. You might notice as you look around the firelight, the strained smiles of wives and children haunted by stories of lost husbands and fathers, and the heavy silence that fills homes where fear lurks beneath the surface. The family bonds that wealth theoretically strengthens often buckle under the stress it brings. Greed and distrust erode relationships, turning one's close kin into wary strangers. The rituals surrounding wealth further illustrate this tension. Gold is often buried or hidden rather than openly displayed, not out of modesty, but necessity. The hoarder's secret stash is both a treasure and a curse, a source of comfort, and a reason to look over one's shoulder. As you listen to the murmured tales from jarls about lost fortunes and violent reprisals, you realize that wealth in this world is less a blessing and more a burden that weighs heavily on the soul. And so, while the gleaming arm rings and silver coins sparkle in the firelight, you understand that the pursuit and possession of wealth often come at a profound human cost. The men who hoard gold lose something vital, not just innocence, but connection, peace, and ultimately themselves die as the fire crackles low and the warriors' voices grow softer. You might feel the haunted echo of this truth settling deep within you. The wealth they chased promised escape, but often led them into a different kind of imprisonment, one shaped by fear, isolation, and loss. Take a deep, slow breath with me now. Let that awareness sink in as the night stretches on outside, silent except for the whispers of the wind through the dark forest. The story of wealth in the Viking Age is not one of triumphant glory alone, but of souls caught in the unyielding grip of greed and danger. Soon, we will move deeper into the burdens faced by these men, how power and riches brought responsibilities as crushing as the coldest winter, and how survival remained a constant, precarious balancing act in a world where fortune and disaster were but two sides of the same cruel coin. The fire crackles low in the great hall as shadows dance across the carved wooden beams overhead. You find yourself slipping into the heavy mantle of a Jarl, the Viking lord, whose wealth and power set him apart from common warriors, yet whose existence is far from enviable. Because in the Viking world, riches come with chains far more binding than iron. Imagine stepping into the jarl's worn leather boots, leather softened and cracked from years of use. The faint aroma of smoked meats lingering from the endless feasts that fill his days. Outside the hall, you can hear the distant murmur of voices, dependents, warriors, and servants, each with their own demands, quietly or boldly expecting your attention and favor. The weight of these expectations presses on your chest more heavily than the ornate gold torque encircling your neck. Being a jarl means more than hoarding gold or commanding raids. It means carrying the crushing responsibility of leadership in a world as unforgiving as the frozen fjords themselves. You are the arbiter of justice, the protector of your people, and the enforcer of law, and the consequences of your decisions ripple outward in ways you cannot control. You might notice how the jarl's days fill with negotiations and disputes over land, marriage alliances, debts, and rival claims. These aren't civil conversations. They are fraught with tension and the ever-present threat of violence. Every decision can spark a feud, a blood feud that might claim dozens of lives and destabilize your hold on power. The jarl's voice must carry both the sternness of a judge and the subtlety of a diplomat. For one wrong word could ignite a chain of events that ends in death. The loneliness of power grows in quiet spaces between decisions. Though surrounded by retainers and kin, the jarl often walks a solitary path. Trust is scarce. Allies may be plotting behind your back, while enemies watch and wait for a chance to strike. Sleep offers little respite. Nightmares of betrayal and loss plague the nights. Perhaps you notice how the jarl balances this precarious life with the demands of feasting and ceremonious events that require lavish displays of wealth and generosity. To maintain loyalty, yet giving too much risks emptying your stores, while giving to little breeds resentment. The line between respected leader and despised miser is narrow and treacherous. The jarl's household is a microcosm of Viking society, hierarchical and volatile. You see the wives and concubines maneuvering for influence, the sons training rigorously not just in combat, but in political cunning, and the servants working tirelessly to keep the wheels of this fragile court turning. Family ties offer both comfort and complication. Alliances might be forged or fractured within the same hearthdot as winter approaches. The jarl also faces practical burdens, ensuring stocks of food and firewood, preparing defenses against rival clans, and planning raids to replenish dwindling resources. Failure is deadly. A harsh winter with empty granaries can mean starvation, rebellion, or invasion. The jarl must act as both warrior and steward, often sacrificing personal safety and peace for the good of the entire community. You might even feel the weight of personal loss that colors many jarls. Stories of fallen brothers, betrayed friends, or children lost to illness and hardship. Beneath the gleam of wealth and power lies a deeply human struggle to hold on, to protect, and to survive amid the relentless brutality of the age. And as the fire flickers ever lower, and the cold wind howls outside the sturdy walls of the great hall, you realize that the life of a jarl is not one of unbridled triumph, but a constant balancing act on a knife's edge where authority is as fragile as the light dancing on the gold, and danger lurks in every shadow. Take a moment now to breathe deeply. Let the gravity of this burden settle in the complex, heavy weight of leadership in a world where wealth is earned and kept at great cost, and where even the most powerful are never truly free. Soon, we will face the cruel grip of winter, a season that devours treasure and life alike, and see how even the strongest jarl must bow before its relentless cold. Winter's grip on wealth short, pale days of autumn have dwindled to almost nothing, swallowed whole by the relentless embrace of winter. As you stand by the smoke hole in the great hall, feeling the bitter wind whip through the opening, you realize that the wealth amassed through dangerous voyages and bloody battles feels suddenly fragile, almost insignificant in the face of the encroaching darkness and cold. This is the true test, the unforgiving crucible that proves whether your riches can truly buy you comfort or merely prolong your suffering. The first snow came weeks ago, a gentle dusting that softened the harsh edges of the landscape, but now it falls with a vengeance, thick, heavy flakes piling high against the walls of the longhouse, muffling all sound. The world outside has become a monochrome canvas of white and gray, broken only by the skeletal branches of trees etched against a perpetually overcast sky. The air itself feels brittle, sharp, piercing through layers of wool and leather as if they were made of thin cloth. You notice the shift in the very atmosphere of the hall. The boisterous laughter and loud boasts of summer's successful raids have been replaced by a quiet, almost fearful hum. Every movement is slower, more deliberate, as if to conserve precious energy. Even the fire, though kept burning diligently in the central hearth, seems to shrink in its struggle against the pervasive cold that seeps in through every crack and crevice. The food stores, once seemingly overflowing with salted meat, dried fish, and barrels of ale, begin to show their true vulnerability. What seemed like abundance just a few weeks ago now looks pitifully small against the vast expanse of the coming months. The calculations begin anew, a grim arithmetic of survival that occupies every waking thought of the jarl, his family, and every household in the settlement. You watch as the carefully portioned meals grow smaller, the meat becoming rarer, replaced increasingly by dried fish and roots. Even the dogs that roam the hall look leaner, their ribs prominent beneath their matted fur. The hunger you thought you had escaped through raiding now returns, a dull ache in your stomach that never truly dissipates, a constant reminder of winter's unforgiving grip. The livestock, once a symbol of your wealth, now become a source of profound anxiety. Their feed is diminishing, and the weakest among them are called to save resources, their meat a welcome, though temporary, addition to the meager diet. You hear the mournful lowing of cattle from the byres, a sound that in this season seems to carry the weight of their own inevitable fate. Every animal that dies means less food for your people come spring, and the wood. The wood is a lifeblood, a constant, consuming need. The piles of firewood that seemed enormous in autumn are shrinking at an alarming rate. Teams of men venture out daily, despite the biting wind and treacherous snow, to fell trees and drag them back to the settlement. Their faces are gaunt, their hands raw and cracked from the cold, their movements slow with exhaustion. You realize that keeping the fire burning, staving off the literal death of cold, is a relentless, physical battle that consumes hours of every day. The jarl, who once boasted of his vast wealth and power, now walks among his people with a more somber demeanor. His eyes constantly assess the diminishing stores, the thinning faces of his warriors, the worried expressions of the women. The burden of leadership shifts from commanding armies to simply ensuring the warmth and survival of his community. His gold and silver cannot melt the snow, cannot grow crops, cannot hunt game from under a meter of ice. You might notice how quickly illness spreads through the confined spaces of the hall. The biting cold, the lack of fresh air, the weakened bodies from poor nutrition all combine to create a breeding ground for coughs, fevers, and worse. Without proper medicine, a common cold can turn into a death sentence. You hear the racking coughs in the night, the feverish whispers, and the eventual silence that means another soul has been claimed by winter. The burial ground, usually frozen solid, becomes a place where bodies are simply stored, wrapped in rough cloth, awaiting the spring thaw. You see the silent procession of figures carrying a small, bundled form, a child, perhaps too young and too weak to withstand the relentless cold and hunger. The grief is quiet, resigned, as if despair itself has frozen the tears in their eyes. Even the previously successful warriors, those who returned from raids laden with treasure, find their fortunes rapidly consumed. The silver arm rings are traded for sacks of grain from neighboring settlements that fared slightly better, or for precious reserves of dried meat. The fine cloaks are patched and mended again and again. The gold, while still valuable, cannot be eaten. Its cold gleam feels mocking when your belly aches with hunger. The mental toll of winter is perhaps as devastating as the physical one. The endless darkness, the grinding monotony of survival, the constant battle against cold and hunger, it wears down the spirit. Depression settles like a thick blanket. Stories become fewer, laughter rarer. People sit in quiet groups around the fire, their eyes vacant, their thoughts perhaps drifting to warmer lands, or simply to the next meager meal. You might find yourself staring at the flickering flames, hypnotized by their dance, wishing for the distant warmth of the sun. The memories of summer, of green fields and abundant food, feel like a dream, a forgotten luxury. This is the ultimate equalizer, the force that reminds even the wealthiest jarl that he is still just a man, vulnerable to the whims of nature. And so, as the longest, darkest nights stretch on, you realize that the relentless grip of winter strips away all pretense of prosperity. It reveals the true, raw struggle for existence, where every day is a victory against the odds, and every piece of wealth, no matter how grand, is merely a temporary shield against the brutal forces of the world. The pursuit of gold, while it might offer temporary reprieve, ultimately cannot defeat the coming of the long night. As the wind howls outside, and the hall settles into its nightly rhythm of quiet breathing and the gentle crackle of the fire, You can feel the profound exhaustion settling into your own bones. Let that weariness become a comfort, a sign that you are truly experiencing the harsh realities of those who lived through these unforgiving times. Death comes for rich, and poor bitter winds of winter carry a somber truth that no amount of gold, power, or valor can escape. Death is the great equalizer, whether you are a humble peasant, a weathered warrior, or a powerful jarl seated atop his throne. The cold, the disease, and the merciless hand of fate reach for everyone alike. Tonight, you find yourself walking the shadowed edges of a Viking settlement where quiet grief and stark reality mingle like smoke rising from a hearth. Step softly now, and imagine the worn paths among the wooden longhouses, narrow, trodden by countless feet over years of hardship and loss. The pervasive chill penetrates deep beneath thick layers of wool and fur. The smell hangs heavy here, a pungent mix of smoke from peat fires, damp earth, and the unmistakable coppery scent of blood and sickness. Perhaps you notice the silence, peculiar and profound. The usual clamor of voices is subdued, replaced by the muted sounds of whispered prayers and the occasional low moan. The community is weary not just from battles or hunger, but from the unrelenting presence of death that weaves through the lives of all who dwell here. In one small, dimly lit hut, the air is thick with the sharp tang of herbs and unwashed bodies. You see a figure lying still on a simple bed of straw, a pale face streaked with sweat and dirt. The shallow rise and fall of the chest barely perceptible around this figure. A few weary family members sit vigil, their faces etched with exhaustion and sorrow. They know the meager medicinal knowledge they possess is no match for the illness ravaging their loved one. Medical treatment in the Viking Age was a fragile craft, part folk knowledge, part ritual, and often powerless against the many diseases that swept through the population. You hear of poultices made from crushed herbs, prayers whispered to the gods, and trepanning the opening of the skull to release evil spirits. A desperate attempt that sometimes brought relief, but more often hastened death. There were no hospitals, no surgeons, only neighbors and family who did what little they could with crude tools and hope. Death often came swiftly for the young and old alike. Infants, particularly vulnerable to infections and malnutrition, were mourned silently and buried in shallow graves to wait for spring thaw. The elderly, weakened by years of labor and hardship, succumbed quietly, their passing marked by simple rites. There were no grand ceremonies for most. The harsh realities of survival demanded swift burials and a focus on those still living. You might notice the communal graves dug in the frozen earth, where bodies are wrapped hastily in woolen cloaks, weighted with stones and lowered into the cold ground. The air is filled with whispered lamentation and the occasional shouted prayer to Odin or Freya, gods hope to guide the departed safely to the afterlife. Funerals were not just farewells, but essential rituals to maintain balance between worlds. To protect the living from restless spirits, disease was a relentless predator. Plague swept through with devastating efficiency, turning once thriving settlements into shadowed husks. You hear accounts of fevers that left skin blistered and cracked, coughs that rattled lungs until breath failed, and boils that festered. With no cure, those afflicted were isolated, sometimes gently, sometimes brutally, to prevent spread. Yet contagion often proved unstoppable. The wealthy were not spared. Despite their fine clothes and better food supplies, jarls and chieftains faced the same microscopic enemies as their poorest subjects. Their houses might be larger, their walls thicker, but illness paid no heed to status. When a chieftain's son fell ill, the entire settlement felt the tremor of fear. Knowing that leadership, too, was fragile and mortal, death also followed. The sword beyond the battlefield, lingering in the wounds of warriors who returned from raids. Without antiseptics or advanced care, infected wounds turned lethal. Amputations were rare and crude, often leading to further complications. Survivors bore scars not only on their bodies, but etched deep into their spirits, haunted by the memory of fallen comrades and injuries that never fully healed. In the longhouse, the line between life and death often felt perilously thin. You might notice how the community gathers to support grieving families, how stories of the deceased become woven into the fabric of collective memory. Names are spoken aloud repeatedly, ensuring they are not forgotten. Songs and poems recount acts of bravery and kindness, attempts to preserve a kind of immortality through words. Yet, even with these rituals, an unsettling truth persists. Death is an inescapable shadow, ever present and indiscriminate. It shapes the rhythm of life, influences decisions, and casts a sober light on the pursuit of wealth and power. For all the swords raised in battle and treasures amassed, no one escapes its final claim. As the cold night deepens and the settlement settles into uneasy rest, take a slow, steady breath with me. Let the quiet resilience of those who face such mortality sink in. Their lives were fleeting, fragile, yet marked by a fierce will to continue amid ceaseless loss. The story of Viking life is not only one of raids, wealth, and glory, but also one of death's unyielding presence of shadow that no gold could ever truly banish. Soon, we will turn toward the echoes of this turbulent age, exploring the legacy left behind, stories written in blood, gold, and memory that ripple far beyond the frozen shores where they began. As the shadows lengthen and the fire's glow dims to embers, you find yourself standing quietly at the edge of a forgotten Viking settlement. The bones of wooden longhouses lie scattered beneath moss and lichen, and the air carries the faint, lingering scent of smoke and salt remnants of lives once lived, struggles once fought, and dreams once chased. The legacy of this age, marked by blood and gold, is both tangible and elusive. Whispering through the winds that sweep across the rugged landscape, step slowly now, and imagine tracing the paths where countless warriors marched to battle, where families gathered around sparse hearths, where fortunes were won and lost beneath the indifferent gaze of the northern sky. These echoes of history speak not only of glory and conquest, but also of sacrifice, pain, and the relentless human cost seared into every coin and scar. You might notice how the legacy of Viking wealth is one of paradox. The gold and silver symbols of success and power tell only part of the story. Their bright shine masks the darker truths beneath. Violent raids that left villages in ashes, families torn apart by death and slavery, communities haunted by feuds that span generations. The pursuit of wealth was inseparable from cycles of bloodshed that shaped the very fabric of society. Consider the bloodlines that were forged and fractured in this turbulent era. Jarls and chieftains rose and fell with swift finality, their ambitions and rivalries spilling over into endless conflicts, feuds, some lasting decades. Cultivated a culture where vengeance was as vital as honor, and peace a fragile, fleeting gift. You might sense the weight carried by descendants, inheriting not just names, but the burdens of ancient grudges and alliances. The impact of this legacy extends far beyond the battlefield or the treasure hoard. It influenced social structures, gender roles, and cultural practices that echo even in modern times. Women, often overlooked in tales of sword and shield, played crucial roles managing households, preserving traditions, and sometimes wielding power in subtle but profound ways. Their experiences, marked by resilience amid hardship, are threads woven deeply into the historical tapestry. You might pause and reflect on how the Viking legacy shaped the very lands they touched. Settlements in distant territories, England, Ireland, Iceland, Greenland bore the marks of Norse influence, blending cultures in ways both constructive and destructive. Language, law, art, and mythology all carry traces of this era's complex interactions, a testament to the enduring reach of Viking endeavors. Yet, beneath all this, there is a human story, one of individuals caught in a relentless push and pull between survival and aspiration. The pursuit of wealth promised escape, power, and security, but often delivered isolation, fear, and loss. Those who chased gold carried with them the scars of battle, the weight of responsibility, and the haunting memories of lives forever changed. As the embers cool and the night deepens, let this legacy settle quietly around you. Feel the layered histories intertwine, the bright allure of treasure and the dark shadows of sacrifice. This is the story of blood and gold, of human struggle etched into the very stones beneath your feet. Take a deep breath now, letting the echoes of the past gently wash over you. The Viking Age, with all its brutality and beauty, leaves behind a complex inheritance, a reminder of the cost of ambition and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of relentless adversity. Soon, we will gently close this long journey, reflecting on the lessons whispered through time and inviting your own mind to drift peacefully into rest, carried by the rhythms of history and the quiet lullaby of a world long past. The long sleep of history as the fire's last embers flicker and fade. You find yourself settling into a quiet, restful space, not just in body, but in mind and spirit. The long, winding journey through the Viking Age, the pursuit of wealth, the trials of battle, the grip of winter, the shadow of death, and the enduring legacy begins to gently dissolve into the stillness around you. Imagine the landscape now, hushed and blanketed in snow, with the silence of a world long past, stretching out beneath a star-filled sky. The once bustling villages and ships have settled into the earth, their stories buried beneath layers of time like precious artifacts, waiting patiently to be uncovered. This long sleep of history is both a rest and a promise of pause that invites reflection and peace. You might feel the calm spreading through your body, each breath slow and even, like the rhythmic rise and fall of the ocean tides. The weight of centuries of human struggle, aspiration, and endurance softens, becoming a gentle murmur beneath your thoughts. The world you have walked through tonight, so distant, and yet so intimately human, folds quietly into the pages of memory. History, in its vastness, reminds us that every life, every pursuit, every moment of joy or sorrow eventually moves toward rest. The Vikings, with their fierce passions and relentless endeavors, have found their own peace in this long sleep. Their voices, once raised in battle cries and songs, now echo softly in the winds and stones. As you drift further into this moment, you might notice the subtle ways their stories continue to lift through the myths whispered beside hearths, the artifacts resting in silent museums, and the rhythms of language and culture shaped by their legacy. These threads connect past and present, weaving a quiet continuity that invites you to rest within the human story. Let your thoughts slow. As the shadows lengthen and the night deepens, there is no rush, no urgency, only the steady, soothing pulse of time's gentle passage. The complexities and hardships of the Viking Age give way to a profound stillness, a lullaby for the soul. Take a deep breath now, feeling the calm wrap around you like a warm cloak. Allow your eyelids to grow heavy, your muscles to relax, and your mind to drift effortlessly. The long sleep of history is here to carry you, to cradle you in the quiet embrace of ages gone by, while you journey toward your own peaceful rest. I thank you for joining me on this slow, deliberate exploration of a world both distant and deeply human. May the stories you've heard ease your mind and soothe your spirit as you slip gently into sleep. Good night and sweet dreams.